Welcome to a very special episode of Pitch Guys. Today, we have something a little different for you. It's our first in a series of sporadic and occasional biographies that we are calling The Story Of. In this very first installment, we tell you the story of Tom Hanks. We'll be back next time with another regular episode featuring Derek, Trevor, and myself. And in the meantime, thanks for listening. Now sit back and enjoy the story of Tom Hanks. The following podcast contains mature content. While efforts were made to ensure accuracy by exhausting the text of Wikipedia entries, the rest is complete and utter bullshit. From Pitch Guys Podcast Network, this is the Story of Podcast. I'm Alan Fink. This is episode 1. The story of Tom Hanks. (1988) San Pedro, Los Angeles, California. There had been a lighting malfunction, and the director had called for a short break in filming. Tom Hanks, age 32, retreated to his trailer. It was a hot day on the set in sunny California, and his trailer's air conditioner was on the fritz again. He poured himself another scotch on the rocks, his third of the day. It was the only drink that worked, the only one that seemed to keep the beast penned up inside of him. He had his good days, and he had his bad days. This was the latter. Tom sat, quietly gazing at himself disdainfully. Just who do you think you are? He looked in the mirror. For Tom Hanks, the pressure was building. After all, Tom was a star on the rise. After a short stint in television, Tom Hanks had racked up an impressive array of box office hits in only a few short years. Splash, Bachelor Party, Big, each hit bringing him more acclaim, more money, more fame, and taking him further away from the Thomas Jeffrey Hanks he had been only a few short years ago. But for all of his secrets, all of the demons that haunted Tom, he was beloved by all who worked with him, the director, cast, and crew alike. On set, he was seen as a polite and professional young actor, but not one person had an inkling of who Tom Hanks really was when he was enclosed in the solitude of his little hot-box set trailer with the broken-down air conditioner. Not one person. Come in. Help yourself to the scotch. His co-star poured himself a stiff drink to match Tom and seated himself beside the actor on his sofa. Not a word was said. No words were needed. They looked into each other's eyes. It was as if they saw their own reflection staring back at themselves. They took great comfort in working together. On set, theirs was a chemistry unrivaled in modern cinema. You always know just what to say. His co-star leaned into Tom on the sofa, so close he could pick up on his Old Spice cologne, a favorite of Tom's, and he softly, tenderly licked him, in his ears, his face, on his mouth. He worked his way downwards until his nose was firmly planted in Tom's crotch. Tom's co-star was Beasley, a 10-year-old French Mastiff. Beasley was a dog, and Tom's co-star in the 1989 film Turner and Hooch, lauded by many critics as Tom Hanks' finest work. 3 years later, Beasley would be found unresponsive in his dressing room, a lethal dose of crack cocaine and heroin dancing around in his bloodstream. It was 1992. At age 13, Beasley the dog was gone. Tom learned the news of his old friend on the set of Philadelphia, a film which earned Hanks his first ever Academy Award. Some say the spirit of Beasley resonated in Hank's performance of a critically ill AIDS patient and a lawyer who sues his law firm for discrimination. No one ever had understood Tom like Beasley, and no one ever would again. (1956) John Muir Hospital, Concord, California. It was a stormy night. Outside it was pouring rain, and the wind was howling. Amos Hanks tore into the hospital parking lot in a burgundy 48 Plymouth that had seen better days. He helped his wife Janet from the back seat of the car. She screamed in pain, tightly clutching the arm of her husband. They made their way to the front entrance of the emergency room. "Somebody help, please. It's my wife. She's in labor." Janet was not a first-time mother. She and Amos had 2 other children together, a girl, Sandra, and a boy, Larry. But something felt different about this one. "It feels like the baby is trying to claw its way out." The nurses quickly butted out their cigarettes into the nearest hospital ashtray and seated Mrs. Hanks in a wheelchair. She was carted to the delivery room, and Amos was left alone to worry about the fate of his wife and his impending fatherhood. He lit a Chesterfield cigarette, his 17th of the day, to calm himself. In the delivery room, the doctor on call arrived. He washed up and prepared himself for what he assumed would be just another typical Saturday night delivery. It would be the furthest thing from typical. Janet Hanks writhed in pain. "I can't do this!" The nurses comforted her, as the doctor calmly took a quick drag and reveled in the smooth, clean freshness of Camel cigarettes. He called for the forceps. Just another routine procedure. The baby was perfectly healthy. And there you have it, a beautiful baby boy. And then a nurse fainted, and the other clasped her mouth in shock. The doctor remained calm, almost analytical, scientific. Surely he had never seen anything quite like this. "What's wrong? What's wrong with my baby?" The nurses, having gathered themselves, comforted Mrs. Hanks by lighting a fresh cigarette for her and placing it in the corner of her mouth to calm her nerves. Janet took little Tom into her arms for the first time. "He's perfect. Perfect from head to toe." But protruding from Tom's big toe, on his right foot, was a 6-inch razor-sharp talon, and as Janet took young Tom to her breast for the first time, the talon retracted. You know, as a producer of several successful podcasts, I can tell you that the days sometimes get long, and it's important for me to keep my energy level up. I don't always have time to cook a hot, fresh meal. I've tried the protein shakes, but who needs the hassle? Taking the time to blend that powder is time away from my work. And not only that, I'm a solid food kind of guy. That's why I was thrilled to discover Schuster's Supplement's new pork chunks. Schuster's pork chunks contain all of the essential ingredients that your body requires to keep firing on all cylinders. And you don't have to stop what you're doing to prepare yourself a meal. I keep a bowl by my desk at all times to munch on throughout the day. No need to wrap that bowl up or put it in the fridge at the end of the day because Schuster's pork chunks never expire. And Schuster's pork chunks come in a variety of appetizing flavors, including customer favorites like vanilla, grape, and salt. And from a health perspective, well, my stool have never been softer. Schuster's pork chunks have changed my life, and I would love for you to try it today. Go to porkchunks.com and enter the coupon code STORYOF to receive 25% off of your first 40-pound bag. It was a peculiar malady, but Amos promised himself there and then that he would do anything necessary to protect his little Tom and give him the best life possible. It started by buying the maternity ward doctor and nurse's silence. It wasn't easy for Amos, who had found work, albeit not always steady, as an itinerant cook. The Plymouth would have to go. But that was the price you'd pay to protect your children. Over the next few years, the family would make do with very little, and this in turn would cause further strains on Janet and Amos's marriage. And so Janet and Amos took their little Thomas home. Aside from the razor-sharp retractable claw that was growing at an alarming rate, Tom seemed, for all intents and purposes, the perfect child. He rarely fussed. He had a healthy appetite and abounding energy, and he had learned to keep his death claw concealed. Where it went when it was retracted was anyone's guess. But as the child grew, so did the darkness inside of him. "Honey, I'm home." "What's the matter?" "It's your son." "Larry? What's the matter?" "No, not Larry, Amos. Tom." Janet led Amos to Tom's bedroom. What the hell? Little Thomas Hanks's bedroom looked like a war zone. There, on the rug next to his small collection of matchbox cars, the bloody, shredded carcasses of 2 ravens and a pigeon. "Tom, get in here." "Yes, Daddy?" "Tom, did you do this?" "I was just playing." Tears started to well up in Tom's eyes. He didn't fully understand, but from the look in his parents' eyes, he had done something wrong. He could see his mother's horror, but more crushing, her sadness. Tom wanted desperately to please his parents. He wanted to be a good boy, but he could not cage his beast. He learned to be more sneaky, to hide his kill, but the 3-year-old lacked the sophistication to keep his secret from his parents. The bodies piled up behind the shed. At first, it was several small birds, but as Tom grew, so did his appetite. He was rapidly becoming a killing machine. Amos had uncovered the corpses of several deer and even a cougar at one point. Amos and Janet struggled to cover the tracks of their precious little boy. Meanwhile, the bills were racking up, and the strains in their marriage only grew. When Tom was 4, Amos packed his bags and took Sandra, Larry, and Tom with him. The marriage was over. Janet kept Jim, Tom's younger brother, with her. Tom and his siblings crisscrossed the country with their father, never truly settling down in one place. By the time Tom was 10, he had lived in 10 houses. As Tom grew, so did his appetite for the hunt. His razor-sharp, retractable toe claw was a bona fide killing utensil that had grown to 12 inches when fully withdrawn, and his speed and stealth were unrivaled in the animal kingdom. There was no doubt. Amos loved his boy, and he did everything he could to protect young Tom. He tried to teach him restraint, but there was a hunger in Tom, and the dead animals kept appearing in the family homes. Birds, chickens, cats, the occasional horse. Amos Hanks feared the worst. As the boy approached puberty, his temper became more uneven. Amos wondered what would happen if he ever turned his attention away from animals. And then Tom discovered his true calling. The family had settled in Oakland, California. Amos had remarried, and Tom attended Skyline High School, where he received a part in the play South Pacific. To say he was bitten would be an under-exaggeration. Theater had taken a hold of Tom Hanks. And for the rest of his high school years, there were no half-mangled corpses of various wildlife rotting in his toy box. They were replaced by scripts and books of monologues. Amos breathed a sigh of relief. Tom was going to be okay. (1978), Cleveland, Ohio. It was closing night, and Tom Hanks was coming off a successful run as Proteus in William Shakespeare's The Two Gentlemen of Verona. The audience had loved it. The audience had loved Tom. For the past 3 years, Hanks had undertaken an internship at the Great Lakes Theater Festival in Cleveland. He had tried his hand at college, attending California State University for a few years. But it was at the Great Lakes Theater Festival where he met Vincent Dowling, an Irish actor and director who had become Tom's mentor. Tom left college, and for 3 years, Tom learned every facet of the theater: acting, directing, lighting, stage management. After a second curtain call, Tom came backstage, sweating, tired. He had put everything he had into his role as Proteus, and the audience had rewarded him for it. Brilliant, Tom. Just brilliant. Vincent Dowling had directed the show, and he couldn't be more proud of his protégé. Thanks, Vincent. I owe it all to you, I really do. But for all of his success and acclaim on the stage, something still wasn't right. For several years, Tom had quelled the beast, but now, here in Cleveland, he was finding it hard to fight his primal urges. He had begun walking late at night, and in this concrete jungle, with no forest or wilderness nearby, Tom needed to find new prey. He found his prey in the seedy criminal underbelly of Cleveland. In the 70s, it was a city racked with a growing crime problem. But in the few years that Tom called Cleveland home, crime rates diminished dramatically. There were rumors on the streets of a beast-like vigilante who some had dubbed Toe Claw. What are you? I'm Toe Claw. There were few people who had encountered him who had lived to tell their stories, but the police were working the case and were bound and determined to track this monster down. Tom slipped out the back theater door for some air. He felt as if he was suffocating. He had gained so much attention, so much praise here in Cleveland for his craft. Why did it seem like it wasn't enough? Hey, man. Nice costume. Your mama make it? I'm in a play. I'm Proteus. I don't give a shit, pretty boy. Just give me your wallet. Tom carefully removed his right shoe. He couldn't help but smile. Oh, please, I'm sorry! Tom! Please, man, just let me go, please. I won't say nothing, please. The backstage door was flung wide open, and Tom's mentor Vincent stared in disbelief as he stared at his protégé on the verge of striking down this thug, his foot-long toe blade inches from the man's neck. You're Toe Claw. I couldn't tell you. I can't help it. I thought I could stop it. I thought theater could take its place, but I just can't get rid of these urges. Tom, I've always known that theater wouldn't be enough for you. There's only one solution. That solution was television. It was time to move on. If he stayed, surely the police would eventually catch him in the act. First, a short stint in New York City. Within a year, he had filmed the pilot for a situation comedy entitled Bosom Buddies. Hanks co-starred with actor Peter Scolari, and the pair played ad men forced to dress up like women in order to secure low-rent housing. The pilot was ordered to series, and Tom moved to Hollywood. Vincent was right. The distraction of a new life in Hollywood, a new life where he'd be seen by millions of people in their homes on their television screens, was once again the distraction needed to put Toeclaw to rest. It was his short stint in television that would lead him to Ron Howard. Bosom Buddies fizzled out after 2 seasons, and that led Tom to guest work on other television shows including Happy Days, where Ron Howard had played Richie Cunningham. It was Tom's work on Happy Days and Bosom Buddies that convinced Ron Howard that Tom Hanks just might be the perfect lead in his feature film debut. That film was 1984's Splash. Hanks played Alan Bauer, a man who unwittingly falls in love with a mermaid. It turned out that Splash was a hit in the making. Directed by a talented newcomer on the scene, Ron Howard, a clever Oscar-nominated screenplay, inspired performances from both Hanks and Daryl Hannah, and a wealth of hilarious supporting characters, including comedians John Candy and Eugene Levy. With a major hit under his belt, the offers came pouring in for Tom Hanks, and in a span of a few short years, he had been cast as a leading man in a plethora of major Hollywood films. He Knows You're Alone, Bachelor Party, The Man with One Red Shoe, Volunteers, The Money Pit, Nothing in Common, Every Time We Say Goodbye, and Dragnet. 8 films in 3 years, from 1984 to 1987. Tom Hanks' star was on the rise, and it was his next effort that would solidify his superstardom. Big was directed by Penny Marshall, and it was a juggernaut at the box office, raking in $151 million worldwide against a production budget of $18 million. Hanks played a boy whose wish to become an adult was granted overnight, and audiences were delighted. Tom Hanks had arrived. The skin on his big toe had long healed over. It had been over 7 years since Tom had withdrawn his razor-sharp toe talon from its fleshy sheath, and while he still felt the urges from time to time, the distractions of a busy life for a major Hollywood star had managed to keep the beast at bay. (2016) Rockefeller Center, New York City. Tom Hanks stood backstage in the wings of Studio 8H, watching the cast's cold open on a nearby monitor. He took a handful of Schuster's Supplements pork chunks and stuffed them in his mouth. He always kept a bag on hand to get his energy up before a big performance. It was his 9th time hosting NBC's Saturday Night Live, and although he had done it so many times before, he still couldn't help but be a little nervous. "That was a great rehearsal today, Tom." It was Lorne Michaels, the show's producer. Thanks, Lorne. I'm just not sure about this monologue. I mean, America's Dad? Isn't that a bit presumptuous? After all of the years of success in film and television, Tom Hanks still doubted himself. This from a man who had taken Hollywood by storm. After the critically lauded Turner and Hooch, Hanks kept churning out hit after hit, winning Best Actor Oscars in 1993 and 1994 for Philadelphia and the much-beloved Forrest Gump. There were so many credits, so many films loved by his fans: Apollo 13, Toy Story, Sleepless in Seattle, Catch Me If You Can, The Da Vinci Code, and the list went on and on. While it might be easiest to credit the distractions of a life in Hollywood for suppressing the savage and dangerous beast known as Toeclaw, there may have been another factor often overlooked. It was during this period, when he moved to Hollywood, that he met the woman who would become his future wife. Tom had been briefly married before, and that union had given him his son Colin, an actor and Hollywood star in his own right. But it was his second wife, Rita Wilson, who kept Tom's beast at bay. Rita and Tom were married in 1987 and remain together to this day. In Hollywood, a marriage lasting more than 5 years is uncommon. A marriage of over 30, almost unheard of. Back in Studio 8H, Lorne Michaels took a moment to ponder Tom's words. Tom, you've been in people's homes, in their living rooms, on the big screen for the better part of 40 years. I mean, for Christ's sake, you're Forrest Gump. You're Woody. This is your home. Hollywood, television, film, all of it. It's yours. And right now, your children need a pep talk. So get out there and do what you do best. As if on cue, the actors on stage shouted out their all-familiar greeting. Live from New York, it's Saturday night! Your host, Tom Hanks. You're home. Tom took a moment to let those words register. For all of his childhood, for as long as he could remember, Tom had been on the move. He'd been on the run. And the beast inside of him that he had managed to successfully suppress for so long now, that beast, it was looking for a place to belong. Tom had found it in a life in Hollywood. Tom walked onto stage. For him, it was comforting. He was in his happy place. He was home. For the first time in a long time, the aching in his right toe had disappeared. Tom spoke out to the audience, his children. You know, a magazine cover recently called me America's Dad, and I would have preferred Sexiest Man Alive, but I will take it. Anyhow, America's feeling a little nervous these days, and I'm a responsible father, so I thought maybe it's time we had a little chat. Tom removed his blazer and replaced it with a comfy gray cardigan. The lights lowered, and the camera zoomed into a medium shot while Tom took a seat on stage. And a nation took comfort in what Tom had to say. But the words weren't just meant for a nation in the midst of a troublesome election. As Tom delivered those lines, read from the cue cards in front of him, he realized that they spoke directly to him as well. You got a lot going on inside of you. Feeling anxious and conflicted, and you're scared about what's going to happen next. Well, you are going to be fine. From Pitch Guys Podcast Network, this has been The Story of Tom Hanks, brought to you by Schuster's Supplements Pork Chunks. You can support this podcast by getting your pork on today. The story of Tom Hanks was written, performed, and produced by me, Alan Fink. To hear more podcasts like this, subscribe to Pitch Guys on Apple Podcasts or your podcast streaming app of choice.